Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery with experienced attorney Sagi Shaked. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are going to talk about common injuries and medical recovery. Sagi, great to see you.
Thanks for having me again, Kevin.
What are some of the most common injuries sustained in truck accidents?
So in truck accidents, we see all types of injuries. The main injuries that you're really seeing when you have these 80,000 pound plus vehicles smashing into people, you're seeing traumatic brain injuries. They're known as TBIs, and usually injuries to the neck and back. We got one the other day was what's called a brachial plexus injury, an injury to, in this case, it was the left shoulder and arm, and that's a debilitating injury. But mainly you're going to see a lot of traumatic brain injuries, neck and back injuries is what you normally see.
How do these injuries differ from those sustained in regular car accidents? I mean, you're dealing with a much bigger vehicle, obviously, so I'm guessing they're probably a little more severe?
Yeah, a lot of times the injuries are more severe because you're dealing with, I'm not talking about a parking lot accident. I'm talking about a vehicle that's, on the highway or some major roadway and they're colliding. And you can imagine the difference between two cars colliding at the same speed or a truck and a car colliding at the same speed. Some of them can be fatalities. And unfortunately, we have a lot of those cases because it just happens so often. Trucks can cause more damage anytime, even if it's in a car. If it's a high speed velocity type of impact, unfortunately, those cars can only protect you so much. And you have a truck coming at you that's weighing 80,000 pounds, there's going to be some horrific injuries.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about. 80,000 pounds. It's a lot of pounds. Can you explain the typical medical recovery process for truck accident victims?
Yeah, so the process that someone goes through when they're involved in a truck accident, it depends on the severity of their injury. So some people, they're in the hospital for weeks or months at a time, and other people get admitted for a day or two, or some people get discharged the same day because it's not life-threatening injuries, but it doesn't mean that they're not injured. They just need to follow up with a specific type of physician, whether it's for your brain, you would follow up with a neurologist, or if you have an orthopedic injury, you'd follow up like a neck or back, or arm or legs, you'd follow up with an orthopedic surgeon. If you need surgery, you might follow up with a specific surgeon, depending on what part of the body got impacted. So it really depends on the type of injury the person has. So to answer that question, it just depends on the injury.
What factors impact the timeline for recovery after a truck accident?
Yeah, so different factors can impact. So for example, if it's a catastrophic type event, and when I mean catastrophic, the injuries are horrific, someone is paralyzed, can't move, the insurance company is going to fight you on that. It also depends on another factor that you would look at is who caused the crash. The clearer the case, meaning the clearer the liability, the clearer the fault of the trucking company or the truck driver, the easier it is to get a recovery and the faster it is to get a recovery. That still doesn't mean it's going to be quick. In Florida, for example, it depends on, let's assume it's a clear liability case. And liability means who's at fault. It depends on the injury. If you have a fatality, and it'll depend on the coverage in the case. So in every case, I'm looking for four things. Number one is who's at fault. That's important in the analysis. If the trucking company is clearly at fault, it's going to be a little bit easier, although it's still a process to go through. If the trucking company is 50% at fault or more than 50% at fault, we have to prove up our case, just like we do if they're at fault. Going to take a little bit longer. The insurance companies are going to fight. The trucking companies are going to fight. So first things first, who's at fault? That's part of my thinking when I'm looking at a case. Second thing is, number two, it's called causation. Are the injuries the individual has, if it's not a fatality, are the injuries caused from this collision, this one, or is it caused from something else, right? If it's caused from this collision, sometimes it's really easy to determine if it's from the collision. For example, someone has broken bones or they're sent immediately to the hospital, then it becomes a lot easier. It's when you're talking about a minor type of impact, people look at it differently and the insurance companies will investigate those cases. Sure. But if you have horrific injuries from a truck accident or a truck crash, those injuries are generally caused from the crash and people are usually going to the hospital. if you have an injury from a truck crash, that's a significant impact. People are usually going to the hospital, and it's kind of the injuries are from that crash. Usually you would look at the pictures of the truck, the pictures of the car or the motorcycle, and you can see someone got really injured. And then you get the medical records and you're able to prove it that way. The third thing we're looking for in every crash, especially trucking accidents, is what are the injuries, not just today, but what does it mean when we look for the future, right? We're looking into the future. It's kind of what, when you hire me, you're asking me to do. You're asking me to be a forensic. Look into your future based on my years of experience and training and having these types of cases. What type of issues are you going to be dealing with in the future? So if you have a traumatic brain injury, you're much more likely to develop dementia in the future. You're much more likely, 2 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide because of the brain injury. If we've had a quadriplegic, someone's quadriplegic, you're going to develop bed sores because you're not able to move all the time unless you have the right help and the right medical care. So it's our job, knowing that we've had these cases in the past, to how to help people who've had those types of injuries, what to look for, and get the right experts involved. The life care planner who can talk about the future care that a person's going to need. And then you get an economist to put those numbers together. So that's the third thing we look for. What are the injuries, not just today, but what do they mean when we look out again into the future? And then the last thing we look for, the fourth thing, in a crash, I'm looking for, is there insurance coverage on the driver? Is there insurance coverage on the motor carrier, the trucking company? Who else is responsible? The broker, the shipper? Is it the truck manufacturer? Maybe there's a component part in there, like the automatic braking system software that went bad and caused this collision or failed to prevent a collision. So those are kind of the 4 things I'm looking at when I'm assessing a case to determine, what do we need to do, or, how long is the case going to take? So a lot of factors are looked at when we're determining, is it going to be a case that we can settle right away? Or is it a case that they're going to put us through the ringer, which is most cases, in order to get you compensation?
If someone's involved with a trucking in a trucking accident, and the driver of the car kind of knows that he screwed up, that was kind of their fault, is it still worth it for them to get a lawyer?
It really depends. I mean, if you're at fault for causing the wreck, even if you're involved with a trucking company, if you're at fault, you're at fault. Don't waste your time going to a doctor, or I mean, if you're hurt, you go to the doctor, but don't waste your time going to a lawyer. I mean, if you caused the crash, but if you didn't cause the crash, or it's maybe shared responsibility, that's when you should see a lawyer.
Okay. I was just curious if there was any sort of benefit to, helping someone, like, I don't know, not have to fork over as much, but it sounds like if you're at fault, just suck it up and deal with it.
Yeah, if you're at fault, you're going to call your insurance company and let your insurance company deal with hopefully the other people didn't get hurt and their property damage and their car damage.
Right. Yeah. How do healthcare providers and attorneys work together to help victims in their recovery process?
A lot of times, a lot of people don't have health insurance. So that becomes a real hurdle to people. Some people can't afford health insurance. Some people lost their job and lost their health insurance. So a lot of times it's a hurdle for them to get the proper medical care that they need. So there are medical providers that are willing to wait till the end of the case to see patients and people who, aren't fortunate enough to have a job that covers them and provides them insurance, health insurance, or other type of insurance to pay for their medical bills. So thankfully, there are medical providers who will wait till the end of the case, and they'll treat people who need the help. So lawyers, if they know these medical providers, they can suggest a name. There's a bunch of them, depending on where you live. Some doctors and facilities don't like to do that. They don't want to have a deposition taken by the defense, because those depositions can be harassing. And when you're in deposition, you can't treat patients. So it really depends. You have to find a doctor's office that's willing to treat you. Now, if you have health insurance, then that's not an issue. But if you don't have health insurance, like a lot of people unfortunately don't, it's tough times for a lot of people. Your lawyer should be able to help you find a whole host of different doctors who can provide you with the medical care and treatment.
You said earlier, you talked about, you kind of have to try to look into the future and see what the potential long-term effects are from a trucking accident. How do you determine that? How do you determine the long-term effects or the complications from injuries?
Yeah, so a lot of times it comes with experience. When you're trying to determine someone's the long-term impact or the long-term effects that an injury can have. I can tell you now, I've been practicing for over 24 years, but when I was a younger lawyer, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, the years of experience of, dealing with it. Because as we get older, you hopefully get wiser. I'll say that I've gotten wiser. I think it applies to everything, right? As we get older, we get wiser. We look back. I think I tell this to my kids. They're 19 and 21. And I tell them anytime like a mistake happens, I know they hate this, but I tell them, you're 19 now. I'll tell my son, you're 19 now. Do you agree with me that you're smarter now, today at 19, than you were when you were 9 years old? And of course, he's going to say yes. And do you agree you're smarter today than you were 15 years old? And the same thing goes for 17-year-olds. You're smarter at 19 than you were at 17. We've all made mistakes in life. And the same thing happens with lawyers. You go to a younger lawyer, and I'm not trying to bash younger lawyers because I've been a younger lawyer, but the experience of dealing with these injuries and seeing what the ramifications are long term, and having been in the trenches in trials and knowing what the defense argues, knowing what these doctors are saying, seeing it and just living life, you see a lot more. So you get to see what people have gone through. For example, when, again, talking about brain injury, someone who has a brain injury, it's not just that they have the brain injury today, but how does that affect them 20 years from now, 30 years from now? So I've seen clients that I represented 20 years ago, and you still see the issues that they're struggling again. And Alzheimer's, when you get a traumatic brain injury, you're now subjected to early stage Alzheimer's, to early stage dementia, to higher suicide rates, to post-traumatic stress disorder, to depression. There's things in there that, unless you're studying all these materials your entire life, you're not going to know unless you've seen it with your clients, or you're continuously getting the education that you need to learn what are the future ramifications. And we're just talking right now about brain injuries, but how about a person who's got a spine injury? What if they had a fusion where their bones were fused together? Are there going to have any ramifications from that? You ask a doctor who works for the insurance company, nope, they're all back to normal. But that's not true. Ask anyone who's had surgery and been around for 20 years, they're going to tell you they have tough days. There's days when the weather changes that causes them problems. So everyone is going to be impacted differently. It's our job as lawyers, when you're representing someone, right? Like a client, your job is to, again, be that forensic, look into the future, talk about the probabilities of what the individual, the person that was hurt, is going to face based on certain types of injuries. And that's kind of what we have to look at to get them a recovery. Because it's not fair if you're representing someone and you don't get them, fair compensation for what they went through because you lack the experience. So if you're a younger lawyer, I would say partner up with someone who's got more experience, who can teach you. So as you get a little bit older, a little bit wiser, you can help people and get them the fair compensation.
A little bit older, a little bit wiser. I don't know, Sagi. I think I was dumb at 19, 15, 13, and 10. So
looking back now, right? You can say that. At the time,
I thought I was the most mature 19-year-old in the history of the world.
Yeah, every 19-year-old knows everything, right? That's just the way it was. At least that's what I think, at least what I'm seeing. They all think they know everything. And then they realize, oh, what a mistake that was.
You kind of touched on a little bit of the depression, the PTSD. How often in your experience do people involved in trucking accidents need mental health resources to get over what is likely one of the more traumatic things they've ever experienced?
So PTSD and depression are a likely event if someone suffered a traumatic brain injury. The problem is when you have a brain injury and the axons and neurons are not connecting properly in the brain. So let's assume someone we'll talk about a frontal lobe injury, right? The front part of their brain got injured and the connections there, or they're becoming a little slower, right? Not necessarily slower, they can't think, they're thinking. But the process of hearing something, right? Because their hearing's off because of the neurons and axon and neuron connection. And now they're hearing it and it takes them a little bit longer to get it out. It can be frustrating to that person when they think they're hearing everything, but they're hearing out of 10 words, they're only hearing 7 words. And so they're missing stuff. They don't know that they may have a hearing issue, right? And if they have a hearing issue, now they're not processing the same, or they're speaking a little slower. And people get frustrated with them. And so that'll bring about depression. That'll bring about that post-traumatic stress disorder that people, if they don't get the help right away, this can be a long-term problem. So even people who do get the help are subject to depression because they're not the same person anymore. A lot of our trucking cases, when someone suffers one of these traumatic brain injury cases, I say it's like a wrongful death case because you have the people who know them, the family members and the friends. They'll be like, that's not the Johnny I knew before the crash. This is a completely different human being. They're suffering, and how they're suffering, they go about it. Again, it may be eye issues where you have someone who has, in their eye, there's 6 muscles. And if one of the muscles is weaker or there's a misalignment, they need special type of prism glasses, for example, because they're seeing either double vision or blurry vision, or they just can't see well. So it really depends on what type of injury it is and how it will, the long-lasting effect of the injury. I would say it just depends on the injury.
That's the scary part, just not the not knowing what's coming later. I mean, like, obviously it's all tough, but trying to figure that out, that can be rough.
Yeah, and again, it's our job to put it to the insurance company so they can see what the future is. They'd really love just to pay you and say, hey, a traumatic brain injury, we'll just pay this sum of money. And it sounds great, but it should be a traumatic brain injury leading to dementia, leading to Alzheimer's, leading to depression, and how that impacts a person long term and how it can impact the family members as well. So all that needs to be looked at. So if you have one of these cases, make sure you address everything, not just PTSD or depression or Alzheimer's or dementia. There's so many more things that need to be addressed. Again, looking at vision issues, looking at hearing issues, cognitive issues, emotional issues. There's so many things that need to be addressed. And we'll do a podcast just on brain injuries and the different problems leading from brain injury. So stay tuned for that.
All right. Yeah, that'll be definitely very interesting. Well, thank you for joining us on Road to Recovery with experienced attorney Sagi Shaked. If you would like to get in touch with Sagi, you could visit shakedlaw.com. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe our channel. Sagi, great stuff as always. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, Kevin. Me too.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.